Thank you, Rhea. Powerful. And what we're looking at today is good grief. Good grief. What is good about grief? You've probably heard that phrase from Charlie Brown or other sources. Grief is a part of life, and the reason grief is a part of life is that grief occurs as a natural response whenever there is some loss that has occurred in our lives. It could be the loss of our home. It could be the loss of a relationship. It could be the loss of a job. It could be the loss of finances. It could be the loss of health, some sort of health challenge or situation going on in your life. It could be a loss of someone very close to you that has made their transition. It could be a pet that has made their transition. There's lots of ways in which we experience loss. And losses occur even when it's something good. Let's say, I don't know, some minister from Wichita decides that he wants to move to Paradise. There's still a loss associated with that because it means moving from those family and friends that one has known for so long and moving here. And yeah, it's wonderful here, but until one can face and embrace those things that one has left, until one can say goodbye, you cannot say hello. And in whatever happens in our life, if we have not learned to say goodbye, we haven't learned to say hello. Some of us are still carrying some of the stories and some of the grief from past events. And that has perhaps come out in what in psychiatry would call come out sideways. What that means is when we suppress something and push something down, it'll find a way to come out. You know? I mean, if you compress something, it's going to find somewhere else to go. And so if we compress and push down our grief or whatever it may be, it's going to come out sideways. It's going to come out in some other ways. Now, some years ago, Win Arn, who was a pioneer in church growth, did a study on why people left their church. I thought this was a very interesting study. This was a number of years ago. But why did people leave their church? And so they did a lot of research on that with a lot of different church people. And of those who had left a church, what they found out was that 90% of them had encountered a serious grief issue that the church in no way addressed. That's interesting to me. By the way, if you listen to the 9 o'clock service or 11 o'clock, I give different information in both. It's the same basic message, but I give different materials. So if you want to watch 9 o'clock, you might hear some other things. So what that tells me is that grief in any congregation, in any spiritual community, can be a factor. And certainly in a congregation where there have been sometimes some difficult transitions from minister to minister, or in a congregation such as this, where my friend Sky St. John, the day afterwards I found out had made his transition. And there's always this stuff like, was there something I could have done? Was there some way in which I could have intervened? I didn't get to be with him as much as some of you, but whenever he came to the mainland and we were at a convention, we would have some time together privately. Sometimes those of us who have survived the loss of someone close to us or the loss of something dear to us, we're left with sometimes regrets, guilt, other feelings. And I want to look at some of the ways this can come out sideways. Now, anger is a normal part of the grief process. Anger it doesn't mean you have to get angry if you're grieving, but it tends to come out. But if we stay stuck there, if that becomes our primary way of living and operating in life, then maybe it means we got stuck somewhere along the way in the grief process. So, if anger is a predominant feature in your life, you might want to stop and examine, where did this come from? And is it coming from some grief process? Is there some old grief that I'm carrying with me? Secondly, resentments. And I talked about this last week. If you did not hear, and I rarely say this because I don't, but anyway, if you didn't see last week's message, please go watch it, because I think it's very, very important about working with our resentments. Now, when it comes to resentments, what I found is that every resentment I could think of ever having had to do with some kind of loss. Resentment was the story I told myself to distance from my grief, from doing my own inner work. As I thought about this, I could not think of a single resentment, and maybe someday I'll think of it, but I couldn't think of a single resentment I have ever had that was not connected in some way with grief. My resentment came from loss of relationship, loss of some sort or another, and it was my defense mechanism to that loss. It was a defense mechanism to what happened. Let me tell you what happened this week. Friday, our pod, I said, sorry to say my pod. Our pod arrived Friday, and so we had the opportunity to unload our pod and take it up these narrow stairs to the third floor of our apartment complex. And some people like Sean and John Ward and his partner Chris and Richard Hughes and Eric Vroom. Robin came over for a while. Various people helped us. Yeah, thank you. Thank you. And so for 2 days, I did a lot of aerobics, a lot of heavy lifting. I'm feeling great. There's a few muscles that are saying, wow, we haven't done that in a while. But it was great exercise. But as soon as the pod got loaded, there was a woman who came down from our complex, and she stood on the sidewalk like this. She had her hands on her hips, she had her glasses down, and she was glaring at me and at the pod. And she had the residential manager right beside her, and she was filling his ears with all kinds of things. Can you see her? And she promptly called the police. Yeah, good. It's been my prayer to meet more and more people on the island. Come on over. So I got to meet some of our finest and best here in Honolulu. And they came over and inspected the city permit that I had gotten from the city of Honolulu that said, yes, indeed, I could park a pod right there, and I was within my legal limits. He looked at it, and, he's like, wow, you're good, man. It was kind of like, and I'm sure she's up there watching. And there is just a little bit of me that, don't you know how far I've moved? Don't you know all the stuff I've had to move? Don't you know how hard this is? Don't you know? I started coming up with this pity party. Have you ever had a pity party? Yeah? No, good. Thank you, Marcia. And fortunately, I didn't send out any invitations. I kept it to a private party. And but I thought, what am I getting resentful for? What's that about? I mean, I caught it in the nick of time. I nipped it in the bud. I recognized what's going on. And what is that about? And it's like, oh, it's just part of my grief response. I love being here. I know I'm called here. I love all of you. Thank you. And at the same time, I know that I've had to leave some things and sell off things and give away things and make changes in my life. So even good things, can be a grief process, because grief is about any change in our life. I want to read just a little bit from the Tao Te Ching. I've been studying the Tao Te Ching for about 30 years. And says this in number 74. If you realize that all things change, there is nothing you will try to hold on to. If you aren't afraid of dying, there is nothing you can't achieve. So it's saying, basically, go with the flow. It's not always easy, right? But what I found out is that if I see a resentment coming up, look at what that's really about. And that is last week's homework assignment, if you remember. If you feel resentment coming up, look at what is the secondary gain. What is it that you get out of holding that resentment? In my case, it made me feel kind of powerful, like, what's that about? So I'm envisioning becoming good friends with this woman. We'll see. Stay tuned for the next chapter. Regrets, I mentioned that. Regrets can come up in the grief process. Guilt, wondering if there's something we could have done differently. Oh, if I'd only done this, then wouldn't have lost the job. Only if this had happened or that would have happened, the relationship might still be together. Does anyone else here play the woulda, shoulda, coulda game? Woulda, shoulda, coulda. If I woulda, if I coulda, then I shoulda. Like if there's something else I could have done. And that seems to become especially predominant if it's some real traumatic loss or something that really affects us deeply. Projection onto others. This is a great one. I went into the store one day. I think it was a Hallmark card, but I've never found it again since. Maybe they were asked to remove it from the shelves, but I thought it was a keeper. On the outside, it looked like a romantic card. And on the front, it said, "Thank you so much for being in my life." And you open it up, and on the inside it says, "Because now I have someone to blame." That is a great card. Right? I mean, projection onto others, projection of blame, projection of anger, whatever, is a great way to somehow try to distract ourselves from our own inner work, to distract ourselves from our grief, to distract ourselves from our resentments, from doing the inner work that we need to do. So, what are some healthy ways? Steps to healing and transformation. Now, this is a spiritual process. I think grief is a very, very spiritual process. It's not fun. If you go on this journey, be sure and take good care of yourself and love yourself. Exercise, do some things that are good for yourself. Be good to you. Find some people who love you and are good to you as you go through this journey. It's the hero's journey. Remember me talking about that a few weeks ago? If you missed that, you can go to the replay button on our website and watch that. The hero's journey, we start out and we cross this threshold going into a whole new area. It can be scary at first because we're going into the unknown. It can even lead to the abyss. Grief can be like that. Sometimes we go into the dark night of the soul. But I promise you, it is a wonderful spiritual tool for transformation of your life. Because what happens in the grief process is that we begin to go deep, if we allow it, go deep to our inner core, to our true being, our true nature. There we touch the being, the presence that we are. There the presence of God is. The presence that can never be killed, diminished, divided, diluted in any way. The presence of God. That presence, that power can carry us through anything. So first acknowledge it. Accept and embrace it. So, one time went through a whole lot of losses. Had multiple losses all at once. You know, marriage, home, career, finances, friends. List goes on. It's a great story if you want to hear it sometime. And so I moved into some very low-income housing. I was a chaplain in psychiatry at that time. So in this very low rent housing, I was surrounded by clients, psychiatric clients. So I get a knock on the door. It could be any time, day or night, you know. One time one knocked on the door and she's holding up her wrists and she had cut her wrists. She was very calm about it. She said, "Chaplain Tim, I cut my wrists again. Could you take me to the hospital?" "Sure, let's go." You know, so it was a challenging time in my life, and I was having to let go of a lot of things in my life. Now, one of the cool things about psychiatric clients is they're pretty much used to seeing everything in terms of human behavior. And if you've ever had the opportunity and privilege of working in a psychiatric facility, you've had the opportunity to see lots of ways in which human behavior can show up. So, I'm sure I did catch some eyes on this one because they may not have seen this before. When in front of my apartment, I had a shovel and I began digging a hole the size of a grave. They may have wondered if there was a dark side to Chaplain Tim. I had 2 big bags of bulbs, you know, like in the fall there, you plant these bulbs, you know, like tulips, narcissus, hyacinth. You plant these bulbs knowing that they will come up in the spring as they go through the cold winter. So I'm digging this thing, and it's after work, so it's early evening. And, of course, in the fall there, the sun goes down early. So there I am in the twilight, digging this thing that looks like a grave. And I have these 2 big bags beside me. I'm not sure what people thought. But I started putting these bulbs in there because for me it helps to do something tangible with my grief. And I realized I'm letting go of a lot. So as I was letting go, I was visualizing all that I was letting go of. And I was imagining each bulb as something I was letting go of. And I was placing it in this grave, knowing that there will be new life. There will be a resurrection that comes out of this. There will be something even better, something good, something bright that will come forth out of this loss. And so as I buried the bulbs, and you wait, because there is a waiting period in grief. Some people have asked me, how long does grief take? It takes as long as it takes. We keep doing the work until we have moved through it. We're not the same after we've gone through it, but we can go through it and we can gain strengths and gifts that we would have not discovered otherwise. And so, sure enough, in the spring, up came these beautiful, beautiful yellow, golden, white flowers. Such a wonderful scent. No one else around there had planted anything like that. So here was all this beauty showing up in this low-rent neighborhood. Several years later, after I had moved from there, I drove back. I wanted to see if those were still blooming. And I came in the spring, and here they were, still brightening up the neighborhood. And I realized that not only do we receive gifts from allowing ourselves to face and embrace this transformative process called grief, but those gifts continue to give. Those gifts continue to inspire our lives. It continues to touch other people's lives if we are willing to do our own inner work. It's powerful work. It's the hero's journey. It's a spiritual journey. Some of you might say, well, this doesn't apply to me. Have any of you changed schools recently? You know who I'm talking to, right? Yep. It's grief that you're dealing with. You're here on the perfect Sunday. Because you leave friends behind, you start a new school. Their school ended 2 weeks ago. They get here, and lo and behold, school starts tomorrow. That was a short vacation, right? Oh, that face says it all. That's perfect. Whatever you've gone through, it's the opportunity for spiritual growth and transformation. And thanks for letting me pick on you just a little. We're all in this together. Access support, counseling, journaling, friends, exercise, activity. Drinking and distractions don't really help. The grief will be waiting for you afterwards. I did a lot of work with alcoholics and drug addicts. And, some of them have been using 25, 30 years. So they sober up. Guess what? They have 25 or 30 years worth of grief and issues they have not faced yet. And all of a sudden, boom, there it is in their face. So, it can delay the process. Sometimes it makes the process worse, but it doesn't really help the process. Allow your feelings, whatever you're feeling. Always know that the presence is with you, even when you do not feel it. There is a strength inside of you that is never depleted, never destroyed, and never diminished. Grief is a powerful means of connecting with that power, our true selves. It can be a powerful pathway of transformation. All of this work leads us to being in the here and now. Let me tell you about somebody I worked with. There was a person I worked with in psychiatry that had years of therapy, intense therapy. She was diligent about trying to do what she needed to do to work on her own stuff. But there was something that she could not face or deal with. It was too painful. And that was the suicide of a loved one. And she was the one who had found them. She couldn't face that. It was hard. It was painful. But she got healthy enough in her life that she figured it was time to face it. And in psychiatry, we had something called psychodrama. You have stage lights. You have someone controlling the lighting. We're listening to her story. We're getting information about how her mother talks, how her father talks, how her brother talks, all of that. And we have different people play the part of those people. And she picks them. So she's in control of the process. No one's doing something to her. She's in control of the process. And so finally they get to her loved one that she didn't have the chance to say goodbye to. The loved one where she had regrets and a sense of guilt about why couldn't she have stopped it? Why couldn't she have intervened? I had been working with her in counseling and in groups, and they asked her, is there anyone here that you trust that you want to play him? Or someone who reminds you of him? And she immediately looked at me, pointed to me, and said, I trust Chaplain Tim, and he reminds me a lot of him. And so I became this person. Now, I've been cued as to, certain lines, but something else took over. It was like I wasn't quite me. And this woman when she saw me, and I talked with her afterwards, she did not see me. She only saw her loved one. When she heard me, she only heard her loved one. She was able to have the talk that she had never been able to have. To ask the questions, why? What could I have done differently? Was there some way in which I could have helped? I'm so sorry. And to hear his words of how much he loved her and how he knew she did everything she could, that it wasn't her fault, it was his own issues. It was a very powerful, life-changing experience. This woman had been in therapy for years, and in a 2-hour session, her life was changed. In a 2-hour session, she was able to let go of the grief, the guilt, the pain she had been carrying and reconcile to this person. She had been taking resentment out on others. She had been angry at others. She had been angry at her own life. But when she began doing her own work, her life was free and she was changed. It was powerful and spiritual. I saw her years later because I would see her once in a while. And she would tell me, Chaplain Tim, that day changed my life forever. That 2-hour period of time. Allow yourself to do the work that needs to be done. If there's resentments, look at what that's about. If there's anger or grief, look at what's going on inside of you. I know 2 things, more than 2, but I know 2 things in regards to this congregation. One is that we are building a wonderful foundation of health, wholeness, reconciliation, peace, moving forward. Secondly, I know that I have never seen a church so poised, so ready for expansive growth, numerically, spiritually, in every way. I've never seen a church with so much potentiality and a desire and willingness to explode with growth. And as each one of us do our inner work, as each one of us does what we are called here to do, as we allow ourselves to face our grief, to face our resentments, to embrace and go through it, go through the healing journey. It's the hero's journey. We will transform ourselves into the image and likeness of the Christ that we already are. We are in the process of being and becoming more and more of what we really are. We're wiping the glass clean so that our true divinity shines forth. That is what this loving Ohana is here to do. Let's do this together. Aloha. Thank you.